There are few sights in Star Wars lore as unsettling as the Emperor's Royal Guard. Crimson robes, faceless visors, silent devotion. They were not stormtroopers nor officers. They were extensions of Palpatine's will, guardians who stood at his side in complete silence. But within their ranks there existed something even darker, a different version, the Shadow Guard. Clad not in red but in black, wielding not ceremonial pikes but lightsaber-bladed weapons of war. They did not speak, they did not question. They existed only as the Emperor's mute, force-sensitive enforcers. Rumors surrounded them even within the Empire. Some believed that they were former Jedi Knights, captured, tortured, and broken until their voices failed. Others thought of them as elite assassins, enhanced through alchemy. But the truth is even more disturbing. The Shadow Guard were the Emperor's attempt to go further than the Royal Guard, to build a core of living shadows whose minds had been erased and tied only to his own. A project inspired by the methods of Darth Vader himself. This is the story of the Emperor's Shadow Guard, silent, terrifying, and perhaps the last true secret that even Darth Vader was never meant to fully uncover. Today we will be analyzing the most secretive and precious darkside organization within the entire Empire, at least to Darth Sidious, the only group that he didn't actively share information about to Darth Vader, including their identity, their training, and most important, their purpose. So greetings lore junkies, and welcome back to the archives. Today, we'll be looking at the Shadow Guard. To understand the Shadow Guard, we first need to understand the crucible of the Imperial Royal Guard. Recruits chosen from across the Empire, often stormtroopers, commandos, or soldiers already proven in loyalty and battle. They would be sent to the world of Yinchor, a desert planet that served as a training ground. The program was a simple one, but brutal. Hundreds entered, and only a handful ever survived the process. Trainees fought one another in lethal contests, encouraged to kill comrades to prove absolute devotion to their emperor. By the end, those that remained were transformed into silent guardians clad in crimson, whose mere presence radiated only fear. Their weapons, typically force pikes, were ceremonial but deadly. The Emperor's Red Guard were already an elite order on their own, feared across the stars. But there were always anomalies. Amid the survivors, some displayed feats that could not be explained by sheer conditioning or skill. Reflexes faster than any soldier, perception sharper than any human sense, impossible survivals. These few were quietly separated. They were screened for force sensitivity, and when it was confirmed, their fate diverged from others. They were not to be mere guards, they were to become something else entirely. This was the seed of the Shadow Guard, elite soldiers forged through the crucible of Yinchor, then reshaped into darkside adepts. What made the Shadow Guard so different was not just their skill, but it was their silence. Although there was a lot of conditioning and programming, many Red Royal Guards still maintained some individuality under their masks of discipline. The Shadow Guard, however, were stripped of identity entirely, stripped of their voice. In fact, they were famous for never speaking. The reason for this is to them there was nothing left to speak from. All of their personalities, their ambitions, and even their sense of self-preservation was erased. This was not loyalty in a normal sense, it was possession. Their minds were wiped, and they became vessels for the will of their master. The Emperor dominated their will in a way that mirrored the Imperial Guard of Darth Vader. Centuries earlier, Vader had built his own core of guardians whose very minds were bound to him, their individuality hollowed out until they existed only as vessels of his will and his power. His guards were so devoted to Vader that they would even stand against other Sith Lords, in some cases, even members of the Dark Council. Palpatine adapted this model. The Shadow Guard were not trained to serve, they were made to be a part of him. Their silence reflected this erasure. They did not need words because the Emperor was their voice. This made the Shadow Guard fundamentally different from the Inquisitors. Inquisitors were fallen Jedi, forced to serve through pain or fear, and always at risk of betrayal. The Shadow Guard, literally though, could no longer betray. They could no longer hesitate. They could not defect. There has never been a record of one abandoning Palpatine's command ever, not once. In this way, they were not soldiers, but proof of Sidious's obsession. The absolute control meant not just obedience, but the annihilation of self. The foundation of the Shadow Guard was the same martial excellence as the Red Guard: unarmed combat, bladed weapons, squad leadership tactics. But layered onto this foundation was something the Crimson Guards would never receive: formal training in the dark side of the Force. The Shadow Guard learned abilities that most Imperials thought impossible outside of Sith, even among the Inquisitors. They could unleash Force Lightning, but the ability to channel pure rage and pure hatred. To wield it, they had to embrace anger. To survive it, they had to endure it. Many were likely forced to withstand lightning as a part of this conditioning. Some speculate the Inquisitors were used to train the Shadow Guard, striking them with lightning as tests of survival, while others suggest that Sidious himself instructed them in secret, behind closed doors, away from Vader's gaze. In addition, they learned Force Choke, Pulse, Repulse, and even Maelstrom. Unlike the Inquisitors who specialized in lightsaber combat, the Shadow Guard emphasized shock powers, overwhelming force abilities used in tandem with their martial prowess. Their signature weapon was the lightsaber pike, a hybrid of the traditional Guard's Force pike and a Jedi weapon. The red blade extended from the tip. It granted reach and leverage in duels. Against Jedi, it was unorthodox and a challenge. This was all by design. Palpatine thrived on the unconventional. Just as he had used Grievous to overwhelm Jedi with alien forms and flurries of blades, and just as the Inquisitors were trained to fight in spinning, unpredictable styles, the lightsaber pike was yet another shock weapon. It forced Jedi to fight in ways that they had not trained for, breaking their rhythm and exploiting hesitation. But unlike Grievous or the Inquisitors, the Shadow Guard wielded these weapons with no concern for their own survival. They did not care if their parries shattered their arms, or if their charges left them open to a death blow. Their goal was not victory, it was only ever obedience. The existence of the Shadow Guard was not hidden among the Empire, but its nature was, even from Darth Vader. The secrecy is telling. Vader oversaw the Inquisitors, breaking and training them himself. Their successes and their failures were his responsibility. But the Shadow Guard were deliberately kept outside of his sphere. Their training was compartmentalized. Their orders came directly from Sidious, and even their origins were obscured. But why? It's because the Shadow Guards were not guards at all. They were the failsafe. Palpatine expected betrayal from Darth Vader. It is the way of the Sith. But if Vader turned against him ever, the Inquisitors could not be trusted to stop him alone. Vader had trained them. He knew their every weakness. The Shadow Guard, however, they were loyal only to Sidious. Their minds bowed before his. Their silence was proof of this. Their identity was no longer just erased to the level of a Red Royal Guard through propaganda and drills. The Shadow Guard seemed to be an experiment where Sidious had literally deleted everything but his own will within these avatars. They were more than soldiers. They did not fear, and they would fight to the death. They were the Emperor's insurance policy against Darth Vader. Warriors that would fall by his blade by the dozens, and a dozen more would rally to attack yet again. They guarded the Emperor's most sensitive strongholds when not with him, installations and secrets. When the Inquisitors hunted Jedi, the Shadow Guard were sent to destroy secrets deemed too dangerous for even Vader to possess. They were created to silence rivals. They led squads of stormtroopers and naval commandos, serving as the nucleus of strike teams. Their presence alone elevated missions into something far more than routine. Their most famous encounters were with Galen Merrick's Starkiller. The Shadow Guards fought him across Nar Shaddaa, Cloud City, Kashyyyk, Raxus Prime, and even the first Death Star. They fought and they died to him without hesitation. They were not expected to succeed. Starkiller overwhelmed them, but this only underlines their role. The Shadow Guard were the Emperor's black blades, sent into impossible battles because no one else could be trusted. No one else would so willingly die. The Shadow Guards reveal something clear. They were the governing force of the dark side in this era. Palpatine placed them not only against Jedi, but against his rivals. They served as enforcers, silencers, and watchdogs. In them, the Emperor had a final line of defense against betrayal, from the Inquisitors, from other Sith, and most important, from Darth Vader. Think of them as silent governors and watchers, not governors of worlds, but the governors of the dark side. They enforced the Emperor's supremacy not through politics or fear of bureaucracy, but through raw, unquestioning, silent power. They are also the rarest version of the Emperor's Royal Guard. Sidious knew that even entire squads of his Red Royal Guard could not withstand his apprentice. He knew the Inquisitors would crumble in fear before him. But the Shadow Guard, they were different. They combined the Guard's discipline with the Inquisitor's power, but without the weaknesses of either. They would keep advancing even as Vader cut them down, because their minds were no longer their own. They would die without fear, without hesitation, and without pause. They were, in essence, Palpatine's way of saying, if my apprentice turns, I have warriors who will throw themselves at him until nothing remains. The Inquisitorius collapsed before the rise of the rebellion. Many fell, betrayed, or were destroyed. But the Shadow Guard endured longer. They survived in the era of the Death Star and beyond, still whispering through the Empire as the Emperor's most loyal protectors. They may have even been the foundation of Palpatine's future vision, a core of Force-sensitive guardians who could replace even the Crimson Royal Guard. Like Vitiate before him, Sidious dreamed of a guard so loyal, so erased of self, that they could outlast apprentices and even entire empires. Had Sidious's reign continued, it is possible the Shadow Guard would have become the ultimate enforcers of his will, an order of silent Force warriors ruling the galaxy as the Emperor's eternal shadow. The Shadow Guard were never numerous, they were never celebrated. They existed in the margins, whispered of, but rarely seen. Yet in their silence lies the truth of Palpatine's philosophy. They were no longer men. They were not Jedi or Sith. They were shadows, minds erased, voices silenced, wills bound. They serve as a terrifying reminder that in Sidious's empire, even loyalty could be weaponized until nothing human remained. And perhaps most haunting of all is the thought of what they could have become. Had the Emperor lived, had his order endured, the Shadow Guard would have evolved into something far more dangerous than the Inquisitors, a corps of governors of the dark side, an eternal guard who would never betray, never falter, and never stop. But anyway, my friends, what are your thoughts on the Shadow Guard, their training, their rarity, and their purpose within the empire of Darth Sidious? And as a big question, how many Shadow Guard do you think it would take to finally take down Darth Vader? As always, my friends, thank you so much for watching, and may the Force be with you.